I was asked about the relationship between violence and video games. I've not seen any study that suggests that there's a link. I really haven't. All the violent images that people see, all the violent video games that people play, yet the relative small number of people that actually engage in that violence suggests that there doesn't seem to be a correlation. But I'm willing to hear if anybody has anything else that they want to say about that. And regarding just in general gun control, one of the many people I interviewed when I did my documentary called Michael and Me was a woman named Joyce Lee Malcolm. She wrote a book called Guns and Violence. And she notes that for the first 100 years or so of our country, there was very, very little gun control laws, as there were very little gun control laws in England. Yet the violent crime rate, the murder rate in England, was much lower than our murder rate, even though neither country had any real gun control laws. And the conclusion is that, for whatever reason, we're tend to commit murder than other people in other countries. Don't know why. Whatever the reason is, it's not the presence or absence of guns based upon the higher murder rate when neither country had any real meaningful gun control laws. Anyway, the book is called Guns and Violence by Joyce Lee Malcolm. We'll put it up on LarryElder.com. We're also going to put up on LarryElder.com a number of the articles I referred to, including one by Gary Kleck called Defensive Gun Use is Not a Myth. And the reason this is important is because it was published in Political Magazine. And in the magazine, they point out two researchers, who claim that Gary Kleck's assessment that 1.25 million defensive gun uses is exorbitantly high, that they're wrong. And so he addressed their criticism. And he noted that they rely on the criticism by a man named David Hemingway. Now, what's interesting about that is the two researchers who criticized Gary Kleck recently and named a man named David Hemingway as a critic, none of them have any real experience in math, in stats, in regression analysis. The two people that criticized him, mentioned in the Political article called Defensive Gun Use is Not a Myth, they're a couple of, quote, Oklahoma investment counselors with no graduate degrees, do not claim to have any training in survey research methods. Like Hemingway, the other critic, who's also untrained in survey methods. So the two biggest critics of Gary Kleck have no blooming idea what they're doing, no training, are not academicians. This the best you can do? Same thing with John Lott. John Lott got hammered. The guy that wrote More Guns, Less Crime. I would imagine that his thesis was probably examined more than almost any other that I can think of. And a bunch of researchers had little nickel and dime criticisms. He corrected the minor criticisms. But his overall premise that when you take law-abiding guns out of the hands of law-abiding people, you take guns out of the hands of law-abiding people, all you're doing is strengthening the hands of the bad guys. That's his premise, and it remains. So this is the best you can do to attack Gary Kleck by using people who aren't even researchers? We'll put it up on LarryElder.com. It's called Defensive Gun Use is Not a Myth. Read it for yourself. I did a show probably 20 years ago, Forgotten Man, and somebody called up, "Oh, Larry, are you talking about people don't use guns that often?" I said, "Sir," at the time I had a 4-hour show. I said, "Here's what I'm going to do." The very first phone call. I said, "The rest of the show, I want people to call in. Don't have to give your name. And we'll even put a time frame on it. 1 year. In the last 1 year, have you or somebody you known used a firearm to defend himself or herself?" The phones went crazy. The whole 4 hours, and this is just L.A., whole 4 hours, people called up and talked about the number of times that they used a gun. I used one here. My friend used one here. I know somebody who did one here. Phones went crazy. That's just 1 year. I got a letter from somebody who once said, "Heard your show. I'm an engineer. And my friend's an engineer. We were having dinner. And both of us heard your show. And before we heard your show, we assumed that the number of defensive uses of guns every year was probably around 50. 50. 50? We had no idea. And we're trained engineers," he said. 50. That's what he thought. One time per month per year. Really. Really. So the headline in Guns and Ammo is called "CDC Gun Research Backfires on Obama," about all the times that people said that the reason we don't know more about how to deal with gun violence is because the CDC has a ban on doing original research. If they were able to do their own research, blah, 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 blah. So they were able to at least research the papers that had researched defensive uses of guns. And the CDC came back and they said,
we know from Census Bureau surveys that something beyond 100,000 uses of guns for self-defense occur every year. We know from smaller surveys of a commercial nature that the number may be as high as 2.5 or 3 million. We don't know what the right number is, but whatever the right number is, it's not a trivial number.
And I was serious about the purpose of the Second Amendment. I can't say I've lost two friends, but certainly I have two friends with whom my friendship is damaged, whether irreparably, I don't know, because of Donald Trump. They're both lawyers. One's a law professor. One is a very senior partner at a major law firm. And both have referred to Donald Trump as a dictator. Both did. Independent conversations. They don't even know each other. Really. If you believe he's a dictator, and if you understand the purpose behind the Second Amendment, which is to prevent tyranny by government, then why in the world would you want to infringe on the Second Amendment when you've got somebody whom you are calling a dictator, who you are saying is lawless, who you are saying is a tyrant? What, you don't mean it? If you don't mean it, then please stop saying it. And if you do mean it, why in the world would you, of all people, and now of all times, want to restrict the ability of people to keep and bear arms to fight off a government that you have called tyrannical? I don't get it. I'm confused. Maybe some of you on the left who call him a tyrant but don't want the Second Amendment can explain the contradiction, because it seems to me it's a contradiction. I'm Larry Elder. Do not leave town.
Larry Elder.